Imagine this, a nation on the brink of collapse, where religion is tearing communities apart, and power is a game few can win. It's 16th century France, and at the center of this chaos is a woman who would go down in history as both a savior and a monster, Catherine de' Medici. She's not just a queen, she's a force of nature, whispered about in hushed tones across royal courts and crowded taverns. They called her the Black Queen, blaming her for everything from political havoc to dark magic. But here's the twist, her enemies feared her not just for what she did, but for what she represented, unyielding power in a world that sought to suppress her. So, how did an orphan girl from Italy become one of the most powerful figures in French history? It wasn't fate, it was survival. Catherine's story begins in tragedy. Both her parents died weeks after her birth, leaving her a pawn in a ruthless game of politics. Sent to be raised by nuns, Catherine quickly learned that staying alive meant mastering the art of alliances and deception. She wasn't just a survivor, she was a strategist. By the time she was 14, Catherine was shipped off to France to marry Henry, the Duke of Orleans. But here's where her story takes a sharp turn. This wasn't a love story. Henry was openly devoted to his mistress, Diane de Poitiers, a woman nearly 20 years his senior. Catherine, sidelined and humiliated, was forced to play a long, silent game. For a decade, she bore no children, an unforgivable flaw for a queen. People began to whisper that she was cursed, barren, or worse. Yet, she stayed in the shadows, watching, learning, waiting. Then, in a twist no one saw coming, she bore not one child, but 10. And 3 of them would rule as kings. Suddenly, Catherine had something to fight for, her dynasty. When Henry died in a bizarre clash accident, Catherine didn't just grieve, she acted. Her eldest son, Francis II, was too young and too weak to rule, so Catherine stepped in. She wasn't content to be a silent queen mother. No, she became the de facto ruler of France. Real power behind the throne. Her reign was anything but peaceful. With France engulfed in brutal religious wars between Catholics and Protestants, Catherine played both sides, shifting alliances as needed. To her supporters, she was a unifier trying to save a fractured country. To her enemies, she was a manipulator orchestrating chaos for her own gain. Then came the event that cemented her dark legacy, the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. Tens of thousands of Protestants were slaughtered in a single, blood-soaked night. Was this Catherine's way of securing her family's power, or was it the ultimate price of a failing kingdom? And that's not all. Catherine's name became synonymous with the mysterious and macabre. Rumors flew that she consulted astrologers like Nostradamus, maintained a secret network of spies, and kept a stash of poisons for those who crossed her. Were these stories true, or were they the fabrications of a terrified and superstitious court? Either way, Catherine de' Medici had cemented herself as one of history's most polarizing figures. So, who is she really? A devoted mother fighting for her children? A political mastermind who stopped at nothing? Or the villain her enemies claimed she was? Her life is a story of power, survival, and unrelenting ambition. And as we peel back the layers of her legacy, the truth might just be stranger than any myth. Stay with us, because the story of Catherine de' Medici is just beginning. But now, we must revisit how it all started. Catherine de' Medici's early life was a masterclass in survival, shaped by tragedy and political chaos. She was born on April 13, 1519, into the powerful Medici family in Florence, a name synonymous with wealth and influence during the Renaissance. Her father, Lorenzo de' Medici, was the Duke of Urbino, and her mother, Madeleine de la Tour d'Auvergne, hailed from French nobility. It seemed she was destined for a life of privilege and power. But within weeks of her birth, everything changed. Both of Catherine's parents died, her father from what was likely syphilis and her mother from complications of childbirth. At less than a month old, Catherine was an orphan. This wasn't just a personal tragedy, it plunged her into the center of a political tug-of-war. So, as factions within Florence fought for control, Catherine became a pawn in their schemes. At one point, she was even held hostage during an uprising, threatened with death by angry mobs. It was clear from an early age that survival in her world required cunning and adaptability. By the time she was 14, Catherine's life took another dramatic turn. Her uncle, Pope Clement VII, arranged her marriage to Henry, the Duke of Orleans, the second son of France's King Francis I. This was a strategic alliance meant to strengthen ties between France and the Papal States. But Catherine's new life in France was far from the fairy tale she might have imagined. She was an outsider, an Italian in a French court that regarded her with suspicion and disdain. Worse, her husband Henry had little interest in her, devoting his affections instead to his longtime mistress, Diane de Poitiers, who was nearly 20 years older than him. For the first 10 years of her marriage, Catherine bore no children, a devastating reality for a woman whose primary duty as a queen was to secure the royal line. Whispers spread through the court that she was barren or cursed. Meanwhile, Diane not only held Henry's heart but also wielded immense political influence, leaving Catherine sidelined and powerless. However, she didn't give in to despair. Instead, she studied the court, observing the power plays and alliances around her. She began laying the groundwork for her own future. Eventually, Catherine's fortunes shifted. After a decade of humiliation, she began bearing children, 10 in total. 3 of her sons would become kings of France. This wasn't just a personal victory, it was a lifeline. Her role as the mother of future monarchs solidified her position in the court and gave her a new avenue to exert influence. Still, her early experiences, being orphaned, marginalized, and underestimated, had taught her a crucial lesson: power isn't given, it's taken. Catherine's early years were a crucible that shaped her into the formidable woman she would later become. Her resilience, patience, and ability to navigate treacherous political landscapes would define her reign. But her story was only just beginning. The trials that awaited her would test every ounce of the strength and cunning she had spent a lifetime developing. When Henry II of France died suddenly in 1559 during a jousting tournament, Catherine de' Medici's life changed overnight. Her husband's death wasn't just a personal loss, it was a moment of reckoning. As the queen, she had spent years in the shadows, overshadowed by her husband and his mistress, Diane de Poitiers. But now, she was thrust into a position of immense responsibility. Her son, Francis II, was only 15 years old when he ascended the throne, too young and inexperienced to wield true power. So, Catherine stepped forward, not as a figurehead, but as the real power behind the throne. Her first move was to secure her position in a court full of wolves. Catherine knew she couldn't afford to wait for respect or loyalty, she had to demand it. She took decisive steps to remove Diane de Poitiers, reclaiming the castles, jewels, and influence that had been stripped from her during Henry's reign. This wasn't just about personal revenge, it was about sending a clear message that Catherine was now the one in control. Therefore, the court's dynamics shifted almost immediately. But the challenges ahead were far greater than court politics. France was on the brink of collapse, torn apart by religious divisions between Catholics and Protestant Huguenots. Catherine was caught in the middle of this firestorm. The powerful Catholic Guise family sought to dominate the throne through young Francis, while the Huguenots pushed back against decades of persecution. Catherine had no choice but to navigate these treacherous waters with precision. She needed to play both sides just enough to maintain stability, but not so much that she lost control. Her ability to maneuver through this chaos earned her a reputation as a master strategist. She wasn't above using betrayal and manipulation to keep her enemies in check. For instance, Catherine brokered alliances with key Catholic leaders while quietly negotiating with moderate Huguenots. She understood that in a fractured France, no single faction could dominate without devastating consequences. So, she positioned herself as the ultimate mediator, ensuring that every side needed her to maintain balance. However, this balancing act wasn't without cost. Her decisions often stoked resentment and mistrust, making her enemies even more determined to undermine her. One of Catherine's greatest adversaries was the Guise family, who believed they were the rightful protectors of Catholic France. The Guises held enormous influence over her son Francis II, leaving Catherine in a dangerous position. But Catherine was patient and calculated. When Francis II died unexpectedly in 1560, Catherine's second son, Charles IX, became king at just 10 years old. This gave her the perfect opportunity to solidify her power as regent. With a child on the throne, Catherine had absolute control over the crown and the policies of France. Under her regency, Catherine made bold moves to maintain her grip on power. She created a network of informants, spies, and allies who kept her enemies in check. She hosted lavish court events to distract and pacify rival factions, all while pulling the strings behind the scenes. Her ability to manipulate the fragile alliances within the French court kept her in power during one of the most volatile periods in the country's history. Catherine de' Medici's rise to power wasn't just about surviving, it was about thriving in a world where women were rarely allowed to lead. She proved that cunning, resilience, and an unshakable will could turn even the most precarious position into an unassailable one. Yet, the conflicts she sought to contain would eventually erupt into full-scale war, forcing her to make decisions that would cement her legacy, in her infamy. Catherine de' Medici's name has always been whispered with an air of fear and fascination. People called her the Poison Queen, accusing her of orchestrating murders with lethal substances and wielding secrets that could bring kingdoms to their knees. But were these tales of poison and dark arts true, or were they carefully crafted lies meant to destroy her legacy? The truth is far more complicated and even more intriguing. Let's start with the most infamous claim, Catherine's alleged use of poison to eliminate her rivals. The French court during her time was a place where survival often meant playing dirty, and Catherine was no stranger to these games. Yet, there's little concrete evidence that she personally used poison to secure her power. So why did this reputation stick? Much of it came from political propaganda. Her enemies used these stories to paint her as a villain, a manipulative figure who would stop at nothing to maintain control. The truth, however, is that Catherine's power lay in her intellect, not just in fear-mongering myths. Adding fuel to the fire was her so-called flying squadron, a group of ladies-in-waiting rumored to be more than just attendants. They were said to seduce influential men at court, extracting secrets and ensuring Catherine stayed one step ahead of her rivals. But was this true? Historians today believe these stories were exaggerated, likely invented by her detractors to tarnish her image. Still, the idea of Catherine orchestrating a web of spies and seductresses adds another layer to her already complex story. If poison and seduction weren't enough, Catherine's fascination with astrology and the occult only deepened the mysteries surrounding her. She famously consulted Nostradamus, the mysterious seer whose baffling predictions captivated Europe. Catherine believed his prophecies held the key to navigating the political chaos of her time. She even had horoscopes cast for her children, hoping to secure their futures through the stars. So, was she superstitious, or did she see astrology as a tool in her arsenal of power? Perhaps it was both. But the rumors didn't stop at prophecies. Stories of Catherine commissioning enchanted objects and engaging in rituals to protect her reign began to circulate. These tales often blurred the line between fact and fiction, feeding the narrative of a queen steeped in dark magic. Was she truly practicing the occult, or were these rumors another attempt to discredit her? The answer remains elusive, but one thing is clear: Catherine knew how to use the perceptions of others to her advantage. Catherine de' Medici's life was a delicate dance between reality and legend. Whether through poison, prophecy, or pure strategy, she held on to power in one of France's most tumultuous eras. Her enemies tried to destroy her with tales of treachery and darkness, but in doing so, they immortalized her as one of history's most hard-to-understand figures. But was she truly involved in the massacre that claimed thousands of lives, and what role did she play? Paris, August 1572. The city was supposed to be celebrating a union of peace. The marriage of Catholic Princess Marguerite de Valois to Protestant leader Henry of Navarre had brought thousands of Huguenots, France's Protestant minority, to the capital. The streets were alive with festivity, but underneath the surface, tension simmered. This wasn't a marriage of love, it was a fragile attempt to bridge a nation divided by religion. Then, just days after the wedding, everything unraveled. On August 22, Admiral Gaspard de Coligny, one of the most prominent Protestant leaders, was ambushed and shot in an assassination attempt. He survived, but the attack sent shockwaves through Paris. Who had ordered it? The Catholics? The Crown? The Protestants demanded answers, and their anger grew. So did fear among the Catholic elite. Catherine de' Medici, Queen Mother of France, found herself at the center of a deadly storm. Catherine had spent years navigating the chaos of France's religious wars, balancing fragile alliances, and ensuring her family's survival. But now, everything was at stake. The Huguenots had gathered in Paris in unprecedented numbers, and their leaders were furious over the attack on Coligny. Rumors swirled of a Protestant uprising, of plots to seize control of the young King Charles IX. Catherine had a choice: act decisively or risk losing everything. On the night of August 23, Catherine met with her advisors in a tense, secret council. By morning, the city would be drenched in blood. The signal was given, and Catholic forces targeted Protestant leaders, beginning with Coligny. What started as a political assassination spiraled into one of the most infamous massacres in history. The St. Bartholomew's Day massacre had begun. For days, the violence spread through Paris and into the provinces. Thousands of Protestants were slaughtered, men, women, and children, while Catholic mobs took to the streets, spurred on by the chaos. The question that has haunted history ever since is, why did Catherine give the order? Was it religious zeal? A calculated political move? Or sheer desperation to secure her dynasty's grip on power? Catherine's motivations remain shrouded in mystery. Some argue she acted to protect her son, King Charles IX, from what she perceived as a Protestant coup. Others suggest she was pressured by hardline Catholic factions, like the Guise family. But one thing is clear: she believed the massacre was the only way to contain the growing Protestant threat. The irony? It did the opposite. The killings deepened the religious divide, plunging France into even more chaos. The aftermath was devastating. The death toll is estimated between 5,000 and 30,000, making it one of the deadliest episodes of religious violence in European history. Catherine's role in orchestrating the massacre cemented her reputation as the Black Queen. To her critics, she became a symbol of cruelty and betrayal. To her defenders, she was a desperate mother protecting her family and her crown in an impossible situation. The massacre changed everything. France's already fragile unity was shattered, and Catherine's legacy was forever stained. The St. Bartholomew's Day massacre is a dangerous reminder of how fear and power can lead to unthinkable decisions, and how one moment can define a ruler for centuries. But there are some good legacies that will always be attributed to her. In fact, some call her a patron of the arts who transformed the cultural landscape of France. Others know her as a political mastermind whose name is forever tied to bloodshed and betrayal. But how can one queen leave behind such drastically different impressions? To understand her legacy, we need to examine the contrasts: her love for beauty and culture versus the ruthless decisions she made to hold power. Let's start with what Catherine brought to France as a Medici. She was born into one of the most powerful families of the Italian Renaissance, a family that valued art, architecture, and innovation. When she arrived in France, she brought that same passion for culture. One of her most notable contributions was the construction of the Tuileries Palace in Paris, a project that symbolized royal grandeur. Catherine personally oversaw its design, ensuring that the palace reflected the elegance and sophistication of Renaissance Italy. The Tuileries became a centerpiece of French architecture and remained a symbol of the monarchy for centuries. But Catherine's influence went beyond buildings. She was a relentless patron of the arts, funding poets, painters, and performers. She played a critical role in developing ballet as an art form in France, merging dance, music, and storytelling into grand court performances. Catherine understood that art could be a tool of power, uniting the fractured French court and showcasing the monarchy's cultural dominance. Therefore, her contributions to art and architecture were not just acts of passion but also strategic moves to solidify her legacy. Yet, for all her cultural achievements, Catherine's political decisions cast a dark shadow over her reputation. And over time, perspectives on Catherine have shifted. Early accounts portrayed her as a dangerous and ruthless leader, but more recent studies suggest she was a woman navigating an era of extreme conflict and uncertainty. Her actions were harsh, but they reflected the reality of ruling in one of the most unstable periods in French history. Was she misunderstood, or did she fully embrace the demands of power in her time? That question remains at the center of her story. What do you think? Was Catherine de' Medici a calculated leader, a victim of her era, or something else entirely? Share your thoughts below. And if stories like this intrigue you, make sure to subscribe for more explorations into the lives of figures who shaped history.